Well, hello once again, and amazingly, this is the last of your recorded online lectures. Now, there is one more recorded aspect of the great debate, which you're going to do in class with the last group, but this is the last official lecture, if you will. And here we're talking about closing all the gaps. So essentially, we're going back to the beginning here, and we're remembering customer gap, expectation versus perception. If they meet, we have no gaps. Everything is great. We keep doing what we're doing. But that's not realistic. There's going to be some differences in terms of perceptions versus expectations. And then we need to diagnose them. And that's what the gaps are about. I'm not going to go through a lot of the details here, but we're talking about the gap 1 through 4. 1 is not knowing what the customers expect. 2, not selecting the right service standards. 3, not delivering the service standards, and 4, not matching the performance to the promises. And I won't be detailing all of these, but gap 1 is about research, understanding the customer, finding out from our frontline employees what the customer wants, and having a good service recovery program. Gap 2 is about designing that service. So we go back to the blueprints, the physical evidence, the servicescape. All those are part of gap 2. Gap 3, that's the human resource aspect of it. It's making sure that we have the right employees doing the right jobs. We teach them the right things. We have the right systems in place for them to deliver the service that we want in terms of what their roles are, what they expect to do, and also what the customers want, the customer's role. And then gap 4 is the service delivery versus external communications. How are we communicating internally? How are we communicating externally of what we're delivering from a service standpoint? Did they match what we're after? Now, if we deliver service, do we deliver profits? This is part of the debate that you're going to be looking at here. Do we? Well, let's dissect it a bit. If we're looking at offensive marketing, okay, basically, how do we go out and attract more customers? Now here, service is about getting the right market share, building our reputation, pricing premium. So we've talked about all these as we went through the various gaps. Particularly, we talked about reputation, and we used the Linden Center as an example. We've talked recently about the gap 4 and the pricing and where we put that, and that leads to sales. If we have the right market share, the right type of customer, the right reputation, the right pricing, that leads to sales, which ultimately leads to profits, right? In theory. Defensively, now we got to be prepared. We got to be able to make sure that we're retaining our customer once we've got them. So we have to have the right cost factors. We have to have the right amount of volume of purchases. So we're talking about long-term value of customers, understanding that. We have to price premium is an issue, word of mouth. All these kind of things affect the ability to keep customers. Are we giving premiums to those people that are loyal customers, for example? And that leads to good margins for us, retaining customers. Remember, it costs less to retain an existing customer than it does to go out and find a new one. And satisfied customers tell more customers, potential customers, about your product. Dissatisfied ones are also the challenge to us. Does that lead to more profits? So we're getting more business for a little less cost. Does that lead to more profits? Again, question to be answered. So we put this together and we say, if we have good systems in place for defensive marketing, how we deal with all of these factors here, and we have good offensive marketing capabilities, sorry about that, flipped it too soon, then that leads to profits. So service, then, and our perceptions of service and behavioral intentions lead to profits as well. So behavioral intentions, the customer's behavioral intention, the customer's retention, we just talked about that leads to profits. Also, behavioral intentions can lead to more sales. So we match up with the customer in terms of what the customer wants. We find that out through our research. We put that into place. We get more sales. That can also lead to more profits. Now, the drivers of service customer aspect of things and the service encounters that happen, the service delivery and how we deliver that service effectively. Think about the critical incident reports and our service encounters. All those service encounters and how we handle it leads to our service quality. how well we are perceived from a service quality standpoint. That leads to behavioral intentions, coming back again, customer retention, profits. Make sense? So far, perhaps. So ultimately, you've seen this before, internal service quality leads to employee satisfaction, leads to employee retention and productivity, leads to external service value, leads to customer satisfaction, leads to customer loyalty, leads to revenue growth and profitability. So if we go back to this area right here, what we're talking about is the J.W. Marriott philosophy: if you treat your employee right, they treat the customer right. Well, what are the challenges with this? One of the big challenges with this, as I see it, is the area of the middle management gap. What happens here is we want to have employee satisfaction. We want to have good employees. But throughout the industry, particularly in Asia, because of the growth of the industry in Asia, we have a dearth. In other words, we have a lack of good quality middle management. Middle managers get to a certain level, they leave. They get frustrated, the number of hours that are there, the years that it takes to get promoted, they leave the industry. So where does that put you? Well, hopefully you move into a role where you can move into middle management very quickly, which allows you to want to stay in the industry, and you can be the source that helps to actually keep the employees, get my arrow in the right place, keep the employees and make them more productive, which ultimately, somehow my cursor is moving too fast today, leads to revenue growth and profitability. And the way you do that, the way you create this gap between the two, in my opinion, is business acumen. What we've been talking about in this class from day one till now. The learning about how you do these things from a standpoint of attracting the right customers, doing it at the right price, and making a profit. And that comes when you understand the business, and when you understand the business, you become a middle manager, you fill that gap, and therefore create a future for the industry and for yourselves. So how do we close the gap with middle management? Improving service. Again, here's another Ritz-Carlton video. I'll let you look at that. This is the same video we've looked at before. This one just is a little later aspect, and I think they do a great job of talking about that very subject. So the last concept we want to talk about here is customer equity. Now, when we think about customer equity, when we think about the term equity, think about a balance sheet. I know. You don't want to think about accounting. That's not what we think about in the hospitality industry, if we're a major in hospitality. But it's important. And I'm going to take a drink on it because it's that important. That's a drink of water, that is. Drink of water. Where does equity fit in the balance sheet, right? Not in the expenses and in the income statement. It's in the balance sheet. So when you have an equity, that's what your business is worth in the long run to someone else. If they're purchasing that business from you, there's an equity there. So customers become a part of your equity in a service. They're important to your service. So we have to, when we're thinking about this, we think about acquiring customer insight. Okay, acquisitions of customer and brand management. How do we get the right positioning in order to acquire the right kind of customers and get the right insight from them? How do we retain the customers, and then how we cross-sell, communicate, customer communication, and brand personality, who we are. This is the basis for the future of our organization. Acquisition, retention, and add-on selling. Now I'm going to use my notes on this a little bit because I want you to understand what we're talking about here in the three different areas. The total aspect of what a customer equity is, if we're trying to measure it, is first your value equity. Okay, this is the customer's objective evaluation of the perceived value. So the perceptions, right? That's what we're talking about here. The customer's perceptions of where you are. So if you might look at this as your TripAdvisor rating, for example, that would be one way to look at how that might be represented. Relationship and retention equity. Okay, what relationship and retention equity is that's the tendency of the customer to return to you, to come back again. So what's the loyalty factor? How many of your customers are return customers coming back again? And then the brand equity is that subjective emotional view of the organization's brand. So when I give you a name like Shangri-La, what's your view? When I give you a name like Holiday Inn, what's your view? And by the way, an American and an Asian would probably have a different opinion of that, because Holiday Inns are different quality levels in different areas. So what is it that you're looking at? That's how we build that relationship. And here are your discussion questions here in terms of the closing the gap. And we're going to do the service profit debate, which will be done by your group. And I'll give you more details on that in a separate lecture.